Hello guys, welcome back, and today we're going to be reviewing and previewing the Stanley Cup final between the St. Louis Blues and the Boston Bruins. Now the Bruins and Blues are meeting up for a great finale, the 1970 Stanley Cup final rematch. So how does this series look for both teams involved, and which team do I predict to win the Stanley Cup this time around? Watch till the end to find out. Now, the 2019 Stanley Cup Final is set. The St. Louis Blues and the Boston Bruins will face off in the Stanley Cup Final, being a rematch of the 1970 Bobby Orr Cup. And of course, every single cup has its storylines, but this one has it in abundance. Now, for the Boston Bruins, they'll come in looking to get their second cup in 3 final appearances since 2011, trying to get that done in this one. And with the Boston Bruins, they were the second-ranked team in the regular season. They've been a great team all season, had a dominant playoffs, and ended up sweeping the Carolina Hurricanes and have an excellent chance to win the cup in this series too. Now for the St. Louis Blues, they have a ton of storylines as well, especially with their team. This is the first time that they made the Stanley Cup Finals since 1970, that being, funnily enough, the Bruins vs. Blues series where Bobby Orr did his crazy magic. It's been 49 years since the St. Louis Blues have been back in the final, but they are here now, they are ready to play, and could very well beat the Boston Bruins. They have a very solid team, and they've proved that so far in these playoffs. The Blues' all-time final record is 0-12, so they haven't exactly had too much success in the Stanley Cup Final when they've gotten there. But this time could be a completely different story. I could see them winning this series, but at least winning a game. I don't see them going over 16. That would almost be impossible in my opinion. While the Bruins are great, the Blues are also a very solid team. They've had that experience so far. They've played against amazing opponents like the San Jose Sharks, so I think they can at least win a game, and I think that's a pretty low bar to set for them. But this matchup between the St. Louis Blues and the Boston Bruins is an excellent one, and one that should be a war right till the very end, the final whistle. And when it comes to both teams, they both have an excellent chance to win this Stanley Cup Final. Both teams are very solidly matched. But when it comes to both teams, how do they really compare, and who really has the advantage in this series? When we look at the stats for both teams are pretty evenly matched, I would say, except for some of the special teams. And when it comes to the special teams, we'll start out with the games played for the Bruins and the Blues. Bruins have played 17 games, while the Blues have played 19 games. When it comes to goals scored, the Blues and the Bruins are tied with 57. When it comes to goals allowed, the Blues have more goals allowed with 48, while the Bruins have 33. When it comes to the power play, which is a big difference, the Boston Bruins have a 34% power play through these playoffs, which is simply sensational. With the Blues, they have a 19.4% power play, not terrible, but definitely not as good as the Boston Bruins. With the penalty kill, the Boston Bruins also have the big advantage, having an 86% penalty kill percentage, which is fantastic, while the Blues have a 78% penalty kill percentage. So it's not as good as that department, and the Boston Bruins, special team-wise, definitely have that advantage. When it comes to Corsi for percentage, both teams are tied with 50, so it's pretty evenly matched right there. When it comes to expected goals for percentage, Boston has the advantage also with 51% to the St. Louis Blues 49%. Statistically, the Boston Bruins have a much better advantage over the St. Louis Blues by how the playoffs have gone so far. With the power play, with the penalty kill, with the expected goals for, it's all in advantage of the Boston Bruins, and by a large margin. Again, that penalty kill, that power play percentage, the special teams especially gobbled up the Carolina Hurricanes in that series for the Boston Bruins, and the Boston Bruins were able to take advantage. And if the St. Louis Blues don't improve their penalty kill, don't improve their special teams overall, it could be a very tough series for them to get a handle of, even if there is less penalties actually called. When it comes to the team leaders in points, the top 5 point getters for each team, we'll first start out with the Boston Bruins, who have Brad Marchand at number 1. He's gotten 18 points so far, having an excellent playoffs for him, at least 2 up to this point. David Pastrnak is number 2 with 15 points. You've got David Krejci at number 3 with 14 points. Patrice Bergeron at number 4 with 13 points. And last but not least, at number 5 in team scoring for the Boston Bruins, you got Charlie Coyle with 12 points. When we look towards the St. Louis Blues top 5, it's also very good. A lot of guys getting a lot of depth scoring, but for the St. Louis Blues, number 1, they have Jaden Schwartz. He's gotten 16 points up to this point, 2 hat-tricks, by the way. He's been very good so far in these playoffs. At number 2 is Ryan O'Reilly with 14 points. Tarasenko at number 3 with 13 points. David Perron also tied at number 4 with 13 points. And last but not least, Alex Pietrangelo with 13 points as well. Now, a big thing to note, especially with the St. Louis Blues, is that depth scoring has been in abundance for them. After the top 5, it doesn't really shrink whatsoever. There's a lot of fantastic forwards who are getting it done at the right times, and that's why St. Louis has gone this far. That's why they played so well up to this point, is clutch goals from depth options. And that's something that while Boston has had some more depth scoring than usual in this playoff run, it's definitely not up to the level of the St. Louis Blues. And for the most part, in the playoffs, especially in the Stanley Cup final, depth really does win, and the St. Louis Blues have that right now. When it comes to the offense overall, I am getting the advantage to the St. Louis Blues in this one. When it comes to the top 5, I think Boston has a more complete top 5, but after that, I think it kind of falls off a little bit. Maybe a little bit lesser than some other teams in the playoffs, but when it comes to the St. Louis Blues, after their top 5, it's still fantastic. There's a lot of guys still contributing that have gotten goals at clutch times, and that's what you need, especially in a Stanley Cup final. With that, in order for them to win, the depth scoring will have to continue, and they can improve that power play as well, get that up there, maybe chip at the Boston Bruins' fantastic penalty kill. I think they have a much better chance to actually win the Stanley Cup final than before. Now moving on to the defense, and this is where we get a lot closer, even then more in the forward group. When it comes to the defense groups for both teams, they're both pretty solid. They could use some work, but are definitely good enough to make the Stanley Cup final. Now we'll start with the Boston Bruins, who have a very solid one up to this point. Guys like Torrey Krug, guys like Charlie McAvoy, guys like Chara, Carlo, Grzelcyk, Clifton. They got a very solid top 6 that has gotten some experience and also has some youth. Guys like Charlie McAvoy, who are still in their early 20s. When you got a guy like Chara, who's in his 40s, it's a nice blend of youthfulness and veteranness, and that's what the Boston Bruins do so well. When it comes to the St. Louis Blues defense, especially the top 4, they are no slouches whatsoever. When it comes to the Blues defense, it's led by obviously the captain, Alex Pietrangelo, fantastic defenseman who has had a big impact so far in the playoffs. You also got Colton Parayko, who is still a fantastic defenseman in his own right. You got Jay Bouwmeester in that top 4, which is still worrying. He has had pretty awful defensively throughout this run, but he's still a veteran player, and of course hasn't won a cup yet. You also got guys like Joel Edmondson, who have been solid depth options for the St. Louis Blues. You also got Vince Dunn, who is a very solid, underrated young player, and last but not least, Bertuzzo, who sometimes fits into that top 6. When it comes to the defense, I think it's a different story. While I think the offense is in favor of the St. Louis Blues, for the defense, I think the Boston Bruins get the advantage, especially healthy. When the Boston Bruins have that, I think their defense is very underrated. It has been so far in the playoffs. They shut down the Carolina Hurricanes to a T. They pretty much shut down the Columbus Blue Jackets, while the Toronto Maple Leafs in round 1 were able to score some goals. The Boston Bruins were able to get the advantage in the end. When it comes to that Boston defense, well, Tuukka Rask had a big reason and a big part of their Stanley Cup final run so far. I think the defense is a big part of their run and one of the main reasons why they're at this point. With a top 4 of Torrey Krug, Charlie McAvoy, Zdeno Chara, and Matt Grzelcyk, that is a very underrated and solid top 4 that I think has potential to win a Stanley Cup. And while obviously the St. Louis Blues are a tough opponent, I think the defense for Boston could potentially shut down the St. Louis Blues if they're not careful. And with that top 4, I think it can be nasty and can get the job done. When it comes to the St. Louis Blues, I think some of their depth options and some of their weak depth, I think, might expose them a little bit when it comes to defense. And the Boston offense, guys like Marchand, guys like David Pastrnak will have a great time versus guys like Robert Bertuzzo and Carl Gunnarsson. Now, when it comes to the goaltending, the next aspect of both teams, it is a very good goalie duel this time around. With the Boston Bruins, obviously Tuukka Rask. When it comes to the St. Louis Blues, Jordan Binnington. Both goaltenders have had a very solid playoff run so far and are looking like probably Conn Smythe candidates for both teams. Now we'll start with Tuukka Rask, who has had an unbelievable playoffs up to this point. He is my Conn Smythe leader, and I think he should be yours because he's had an absolutely fantastic playoff run that not many goaltenders can match right now. When it comes to his playoff run so far, he has played 17 games, getting a 1.84 goals against average and a .942 save percentage. That's pretty good, and Tuukka Rask has been good throughout the whole playoffs so far. While he was meh and good against Toronto, he stepped it up versus Columbus and practically shut down the Carolina Hurricanes all on his own. He was fantastic in the playoffs so far, and I see no reason why he can't continue that versus the St. Louis Blues. When it comes to Jordan Binnington, he's also had a very impressive playoff so far, playing 19 games, all 19 games for the St. Louis Blues, getting a 2.37 goals against average and a .914 save percentage. And while those stats don't look amazing, the goal saved above average is fantastic and proves how good he has been. He has a 4.79 goals saved above average, which is second in the playoffs so far, just behind, of course, Tuukka Rask. And he has an amazing playoffs so far, too. One of the main reasons why St. Louis is up to this point. He had a fantastic series, I felt, versus the San Jose Sharks, he didn't really allow too much, and he was fantastic throughout the whole series. Again, stoning the San Jose Sharks quite well. And when it comes to the Boston Bruins, they might expose him a little bit, but he's been confident in the net so far. And honestly, this goalie duel has a lot of hype behind it, as it should, because it's fantastic, and both goaltenders deserve to be at this point. When it comes to goaltending, again, both goaltenders are fantastic. They've had excellent playoff runs so far. But when it comes to goaltending, I gotta give Grav credit for what he's done so far. Again, he is my Conn Smythe leader right now. He's done fantastic things over the Boston Bruins. Jordan Binnington, obviously, is a goaltender on the other side and has had an amazing playoff run so far. Grav's just putting up godly numbers, and I can't really neglect that. When it comes to the offense, I give the St. Louis Blues the slight advantage over the Boston Bruins. When it comes to defense and goaltending, I think the Boston Bruins have that in the bag, especially goaltending too, where, yes, Jordan Binnington has been solid, but Tuukka has just been on a godly playoff run so far, and I can't really forget that. When it comes to the Boston Bruins, I think they have more advantages, especially on the special teams as well, and for the Boston Bruins, right now, I would say they're the favorite to win the Cup. Now, on paper, I'd say the Boston Bruins are the favorite for this one. When it comes to the stats, comparing both teams, I think the St. Louis Blues, yes, they've had an amazing playoffs run so far, but the Boston Bruins have just been a little bit more dominant, and we've seen that so far, especially in that series versus the Carolina Hurricanes. When it comes to the Stanley Cup Final, especially, rest, I think, is a big factor. The Boston Bruins sweeping the Carolina Hurricanes have a total of 11 rest days, which is huge for them. I have seen some people on Twitter, whatever it might be, saying that the Boston Bruins having those rest days might make them a little bit rusty, but I just don't see that for them whatsoever. It does depend on the situation, I do say that, but for the Boston Bruins, I think having those rest days is very crucial for them. They got some older guys like David Krejci, guys like Zdeno Chara, guys like Patrice Bergeron, and while a guy like Patrice Bergeron doesn't need the rest, it certainly wouldn't hurt. And I can see the argument that they might get rusty. I think if it's a younger team that still has that fuel in the tank, I can see that happening, but for older guys like the Boston Bruins that they have right now, I think it'll definitely help them. A guy like Zdeno Chara, who is banged up for the Carolina Hurricanes, he needs some obvious rest, and in the Stanley Cup Final, he'll have that, and he'll be ready to go, which is huge for the Boston Bruins and the whole team. When it comes to this series, we have all things involved, whether it's the goaltending, the offense, and defense, factoring in everything. When it comes to this series, I think the Boston Bruins will win this one. While the St. Louis Blues have an excellent roster, I see the Boston Bruins winning this series, and I'm going to say the Boston Bruins win this series in 6. While the St. Louis Blues have a great roster, they've had an amazing playoff run so far, I see the Boston Bruins kind of exposing some of their flaws when it comes to the special teams, when it comes to the defense, depth-wise especially. I think the Boston Bruins are studying the St. Louis Blues quite well. They have a lot of time to with the 11 rest days. And when it comes to the Boston Bruins, I think they'll have an excellent series. They'll be healthy, ready to go, and I think they'll get it done versus the St. Louis Blues again. But again, I see this being a very close series between Boston and St. Louis. I see it going to 6 and the Boston Bruins winning it in front of the St. Louis crowd, which will be very interesting, by the way. I see the Boston Bruins again having the St. Louis Blues. I don't think they'll get revenge for 1970. I don't see that happening. While I don't think Brad Marchand is going to flip out of the air like Bobby Orr, I think the Boston Bruins will get it done in 6 games and win the 2019 Stanley Cup. When it comes to who I'm rooting for in this series, some of you guys know I'm pretty conflicted on it. With the Boston Bruins for the St. Louis Blues, it's a pretty conflicting series for me. It's a pretty bad one, not an ideal matchup by any means for me. I'm a Dallas Stars fan, they're my first favorite team. San Jose is my 5th favorite team, but still, even with that, I will be cheering for the St. Louis Blues in this series. Yes, I do like the St. Louis Blues, or I do not dislike the St. Louis Blues a little bit more than the Boston Bruins. When it comes to this series, when it comes to the Stanley Cup, I want to see a new team win the Stanley Cup, and the St. Louis Blues obviously fit that bill. So while I was obviously tempted to root for the Boston Bruins because I'm a Dallas Stars fan, when it comes to the St. Louis Blues, they're a much better story. Them winning the Cup will be a much better thing to actually happen to the hockey world. When it comes to their hockey history, it's obviously not been that great, and for St. Louis Blues fans, they deserve to win a Cup finally, and I hope it actually happens this time around. With the Boston Bruins, yes, I think I hate them a little bit less than the St. Louis Blues, but I don't want to see the same team win the Stanley Cup. I want to see a new team win, and having Brad Marchand hoisting the Cup would not be a pretty sight to see. While I don't really like both teams involved, it should still be a fantastic series, an entertaining one. Again, I see it going 6 games, but it could possibly go 7 as well. I think it'll be an amazing series to watch, a fun one, and for the 2019 NHL Stanley Cup Finals, while it's not my ideal matchup, it should be still a very good one and a classic in the end. But of course, with this video, I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments down below. So, let me know, what do you think of my 2019 Stanley Cup playoff predictions? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? And what do you see happening? Do you see the Boston Bruins winning or the St. Louis Blues? But, if you guys want some more Grav videos just like this one, you can click on this card right here to watch my video about NHL refs and why they've been so bad so far in these playoffs. But, that'll be it for today, guys. If you guys did enjoy, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Again, comment down below your thoughts on this series and who you think wins. And I'll see you guys in the next video or stream. Goodbye.